In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
The USA officially joined World War II in December 1941 after the powers that be allowed Japan to invade Pearl Harbor. But the powers behind the military might of the U.S. had already joined the war effort in the 1930s because of what to them would have been considered a looming threat to take over the auto industry. I call this threat to the status quo the rural legend. People down home were talking about a car engine, a kind of a car engine that was not smelly or dirty and whose fuel could not be monopolized. I should say energy source, because you can't run a car on your imagination. You have to have an energy source, even if it's not fuel. For example, batteries. Electricity is not fuel, it's something else, it's energy. The war actually began with the rise to power of Hitler in 1933 and the arming of Germany throughout the 1930s, even though he didn't start attacking other countries until 1938. Banker and later Senator Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of two key neocon globalist U.S. presidents of my time, worked with at least one German industrialist who was financially supporting Hitler's rise to power. Germany's taking up of arms during the 1930s was the real start of World War II. In 1933, the comfortable top cruising speed of the average automobile was only 40 to 50 miles per hour. Since the oil profiteers were insatiable in their greed, they wanted more cars, bigger cars, faster cars, and cars that would go further between fill-ups. In 1933, most cars had to be filled up after about 150 miles of driving. The top range was about 200 miles between fill-ups, but the bottom of the gas tank had to be kept diluted due to dirty fuel problems. The bottom of the gas tank fuel was still a problem for some cars in the 1970s, which I know because I always run my car out of gas and then had to pour a couple of drops of gas in the top of the carburetor to make it run again. While the gas-powered car had certainly grabbed the auto market by 1933, in the minds of many inventors, a mistake had been made. From the 1880s on through the turn of the century, the decision had not been made yet as to what kind of fuel would be best for transit. They were thinking of electric, they were thinking of steam, they were thinking of gas. It was all pretty much even Steven for a long time. The compressed air-powered vehicle had shown more promise than any for a variety of reasons. Compressed air. There was no elevated heat or combustion in the car, no noxious exhaust gases, and no big bank of toxic, expensive batteries to dispose of after they wore out after a couple of years. Those things are heavy. How do you get rid of them? Where do you put the dead ones? They're big. They're poisonous. In the air car, just an inert steel gas tank that lasts for 30 years. And when you have to get a new one, well, the old one can be recycled into new steel again. Not only that, but the compressed air engine worked like the steam engine, better than any combustion engine, especially for wheeled vehicles, since the expansion engine, unlike the combustion engine, delivers maximum torque at starting speeds when it's needed. The piston compressed air engine was perfect for the automobile, except for one thing. The air car would only travel a few miles between fill-ups. But inventors won't take no for an answer when they've got a good idea. Even if they only think they've got a good idea, they still won't take no for an answer because that's what inventors are like. But engineers in the coal mining haulage industry had started to take advantage of solar-sourced ambient heat by 1910, and this technology was spreading rapidly throughout the world's coal mining industry by 1933. The notion of running a vehicle partly on solar energy, that is, on ambient heat, started in the U.S. with patents beginning in 1907 by Charles Bowen, who was a mining engineer. But by 1933, Germany had it, France had it, and Europe was improving on it, and the notion was spreading to everyday inventors all over the world. In 1926, a popular cartoonist published a fictional daily cartoon strip in newspapers, lampooning the adventures of a typical wild-eyed air car inventor who was convinced he could revolutionize the industry and totally eliminate the gasoline industry by creating a car that would run 100% on solar-sourced ambient heat, the ordinary heat in the air that you and I breathe. This cartoon strip ran daily all over the U.S. for a whole year. People read this every day for a year. By the late 1930s, well-meaning inventors were already running amok, publishing claims, applying for patents, and threatening to turn the petroleum industry on its head. Every academic library had copies of compressed air engineering textbooks that any educated person could read and could use to grasp the basics of what had to be done in order to increase the potential range of an air car. You could put the compressor in the tank to conserve all the compression heat, which would then act as fuel for the car. You could put low-pressure air into a high-pressure tank using injectors and acoustic power instead of standard compressors. You could reuse the air exhausted by the engine instead of throwing out whatever energy was still left in it. You could recompress it. You could use the bouncing of the car on its shock absorbers to heat the air in the tank. You could capture some of the passing wind relative to the car's motion in order to heat the air in the tank. You could use the compressor to decelerate and stop the car, which would contribute vastly to the range of the car. All these things had been patented many times and tested in real vehicles by the late 1930s. My popular website, aircaraccess.com, gives a lot more technical details. Not the final answer, but I moved it, so that's why I'm bringing this up, because I still own aircaraccess.com and it's not for sale, but I moved it to limberluck.com. So just go to limberluck.com and there's something there that'll show you my current idea on a foolproof method for getting low pressure air into a high pressure tank and conserving all the compression heat at the same time. I can't test it. I don't have any money to test it, and I got too many hobbies already. I think you should test it and tell me how it goes. Send me a videotape, and I'll put it on my website and my, what do you call this thing? YouTube channel, yeah. The textbooks of today barely mention compressed air. Last time I checked, only one modern textbook for compressed air even exists in print, and it cost $500 at the time. That was years ago. I found a copy of it online, and it was all abstract gobbledygook smarmed with unnecessary calculus. I mean, compressed air is simple. Understanding how it works isn't extremely simple, but most of the math is pretty easy, mostly algebra, and you don't have to actually do the calculus. I wrote a book called The Compressed Air Power Secrets. One guy gave me $900 for this book. This is a true story. I wouldn't make this up. I sure hell never expected it. It was a free book, available for a donation. I don't pass out copies of it because it needs improvement. It needs corrections. It was my bestseller, for sure. This is one of the fruits of World War II, an engineering class made inaccessible to self-taught backyard mechanic inventors. By reinventing engineering education, the powers that be made compressed air engineering look like just more rocket science. And then they kept it to themselves for the production of military gadgets such as vertical takeoff jets, which the VTOL aspect, the vertical takeoff and landing, uses great big giant injectors or ejectors, basically compressors with no moving parts. I don't know anything about it, but I've been told this by an engineer who studied it, that VTOL technology relies partially on, you guessed it, ambient heat. They take energy out of the air itself for part of their functionability. That $500 compressed air textbook, I guarantee you, has been read carefully by exactly two people on Earth. The guy who wrote it and the guy who okayed it for publication. The guy who okayed it for publication was a black arts operative whose job was to make sure the book would not encourage anyone to take compressed air seriously. Now, I'm just making this up. It's all just conspiracy theory, right? Somebody got to think about possibilities around here instead of, we can't do this, we can't do that. I'll tell you, the difference between an inventor and an engineer. This is a big secret, so I'm going to let you in on it. An inventor starts with the notion that it will work because it's my idea, so it has to work. And I'm going to work backwards from it will work, and I'm going to figure out how to make it work. An engineer, on the other hand, is usually employed by a big company, and his job is to save the company money or to make the company money. But his first job is to save the company money because the boss is going to have some great idea, because he's a rich guy, and rich guys get these big ideas because they're too big for their britches. And they say, well, we're going to do this. He's acting like an inventor, right? And the engineer's job is to save him millions of dollars by saying, well, no, that won't work, and here's why. Okay, here's the math, here's the theory, here's the textbook or the scientific journal article that proves you wrong. It won't work, so don't do it, don't waste your money. And the engineer gets a promotion for saving the boss a whole bunch of money. So the engineer and the inventor, they pass each other in the hall, you might say. The plain, understandable textbooks of earlier days still exist in the dusty basements of college libraries, but the engineers of today are taught what the masters of the universe want them to believe, which is easy to do because they ain't going to learn anything from those textbooks. They are generally taught their job when they get their job. The purpose of engineering school is to weed out people who don't have the ability to understand technical concepts. The purpose of engineering is to make stuff. The difference is most engineers graduate from engineering school without the ability to make stuff. They get a job and then they learn the trade secrets of where they're working. I'm just making this up. I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. I could bore you with the details of what was known to the old-timers who who knew something about compressed air that engineers of today no longer know. But these details are available at my website, limberluck.com. The point is that there is a natural tendency for leaders of the different biggest industries on earth to be the same people, and or related to the same people, and or friends with the same people. They're all in the same club, not because they're so friendly, not because they're conspiring as such, but because they've blackmailed each other into submitting to common goals. I'm talking about the top layer here. I'm not talking about the engineers. I'm talking about the guys who engineer society. They've blackmailed each other into submitting to common goals, including a certain level of secrecy. Yeah, I'm just making all this up. I don't know anything. I find conspiracy theory to be entertaining. I'm just making all this up. None of it's true. Not one drop of it. Within this group of elevated subhumans, honesty is considered the worst policy, and keeping their enemies alive is not one of their goals. Just as the mining engineers of 1929 were intimately associated with the petroleum engineers of the same era, and the compressed air engineers of the same era, today's banking, real estate, insurance, political, military, industrial, petroleum, and mass media are all controlled by the same people. Same, friends of the same, relatives of the same. The buying and selling of influence is not a theory, it's a fact. The elevation of bottom feeders due to who they know and what they're willing to do is not a theory, it's what makes the world go round. Anyone who suggests that billionaires don't put their heads together to, I was going to say exact undue control over the common folk, but that would be conspiracy theory. Anyone who thinks these guys don't talk over lunch has not put any thought into it. Yeah, I'm a billionaire, but I'm not going to do anything to try and remain a billionaire. Anyone who thinks that the rich and powerful are just folks like us, just down-home, plain old folks like us, needs to get out of the house and take a look around. Now, getting back to the topic of compressed air and cars, so-called free-range air cars that carry their own compressor. I don't necessarily believe that air cars can run on ambient heat without stopping for a fill-up, but I know that air cars can carry their own compressor. So the inconvenient fact about these cars, the part that I know for sure is true, is that air car drivers can pull over whenever they want and take a nap while ambient heat-powered compressors fill their tanks. I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm not stupid. I was stupid for a long time, but I finally realized, all these inventors, and there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens, there's dozens of air car inventors, and that doesn't count the ones who kept their secret to themselves. I'm just talking about the ones who managed to get a little publicity or get a patent or whatever. These guys, I didn't catch on to this for a long time. So I was accused of being interested in perpetual motion, although I don't believe it and I don't find it interesting. I like the notion of a superior solar source energy, like, for example, not windmills, not solar panels, nothing involving big banks of batteries, something actually usable, sustainable. I was fooled for a long time by magical thinking, wishful thinking. But I had to face the fact eventually that these inventors, they didn't claim that you would never run out of air. They claimed that the car would fill its own tank. Now think about it. That could just as well mean, well, that gauge is getting kind of low. Let's have us a little picnic while the car is filling itself. We'll pull over and sit under that tree and eat our lunch while the car is filling itself. We go in that casino and gamble ourselves silly while the car is filling itself. Okay? That's just as much a free-range air car as a car that runs continuously and never stops. And that is a new point that I am trying to make that I never made on my old website. And I think it's the most important point that I've ever made in some ways, because it takes the air car completely out of the domain of perpetual motion and makes it comparable to the electric cars that we're already using. You see, if we could pull a whole bunch of electricity out of the air, and we can pull a little bit out of the air, but I don't think we can pull a whole lot, not yet. I think they'll figure that out too. But if we could pull a whole bunch of electricity out of the air real fast, out of the environment, then you would have a machine on a car that did that, and you'd have an electric car, and your car would never stop for fill-ups or for recharging. Air car, different, because the air car is surrounded by air that is heated up from minus 460 degrees Fahrenheit. Minus 460 degrees Fahrenheit, that's absolute zero, to whatever the ambient temperature happens to be. That's a lot of energy. And the air car is driving through its own fuel supply. So on one hand, the modified version of the free-range air car that I'm talking about, the car that you stop and have a picnic while your car refills itself, on one hand, it's similar to an electric car because you might have to stop and recharge it, like if you're in a mountainous terrain or whatever. On the other hand, it's so much better in many ways than the electric car because your electric charging station, it can't be carried on an electric car, whereas an air compressor can be powered by an air engine. I've done it. I'm not saying that it would have, that it was sustainable, but an air motor can most certainly run an air compressor. Just that bare fact. Don't read anything into that. Compressed air stations would still exist for cars that are malfunctioning, break a hose or a pipe and you lose all your air. For mountainous terrain, you can go up the hill too fast, the compressor breaks, the engine breaks. For cold places, you're driving around in Alaska and there's not enough heat in the air to keep you going. There would still be compressed air stations, but in general, under some conditions, and if you knew what you were doing, you could drive your air car from coast to coast without visiting an air station until your car broke. You would have to know what you're doing. There were so many inventors making these claims during the 1930s that something had to be done during and after World War II. The textbooks were upgraded to incomprehensibility. The coal mining equipment of Europe was destroyed by the war, and advances in the combustion engine technology quickly made air cars a fringe topic by 1948, when the military-industrial complex established its all-important centers of operation for World War III, the oil war, and a new Middle Eastern country controlled by them, and a new bought and paid for archipelago nation in a Southeast Asia, or as the Google Wikipedia complex states, it serves as a maritime gateway positioned to the southeast of the mainland Asian continent, directly east of Vietnam and north of Indonesia. The freeing of the Philippines in 1945 was a catch and pseudo-release operation. The U.S. still controls the Philippines. Speaking of Vietnam, that whole fiasco was a perfect example of the military-industrial complex unburdening itself of old stock so they could create, store, and sell better machinery for destroying civilizations for profit. Starting to sound like a peacenik, eh? I've been a peacenik since I was 13. That's more than 50 years. With Israel, the Philippines, and Ukraine as local stations of military might, World War III was going to be the climactic rise to power of the one world globalist movement that President Eisenhower more than hinted at in 1961 when he told us and told John F. Kennedy to watch our butts. We didn't watch our butts. We let them kill the president and his brother who were trying to dismantle their power structure. We got addicted to alcohol, street drugs, psychiatric drugs, and social media, and thus we quickly became stupider than rocks. In our weakened state of unimind, we allowed the neocons to switch from Republican to Democrat in order to win over the complainer class, the liberals. We let our first Democrat neocon president forgive the banksters of trillions in fraud on his way into the White House. Then we kept our eyes closed while he bombed anyone he was told to bomb as a test of the new concept of remote warfare. President Trump is trying to do what Kennedy tried to do, but he is vastly more intuitive and experienced and a lot meaner and tougher than Kennedy ever was. If Trump doesn't fail to take control of Iran, the Zionist arm of the Hubbletongue loses its power. Israel will no longer be needed as an ally. If Trump doesn't fail to put Ukraine and Russia in their place, then the Cold War ends again. And if he manages to keep China out of the Philippines, then I will be one happy camper. But the main point of the Iran war is to make the dust bowl we call Israel irrelevant again. Trump might be able to slow the military-industrial complex down, but he can't put them out of business and would never have been elected if he had not kowtowed to their Israel First agenda. You can't conduct World War III, the oil war, without a military base in the Middle East. Trump is not only stopping a bad dictatorship in Iran, he is obtaining for the civilized world a military base in the Middle East for the purpose of maintaining peace. As for cars that run on fresh air, good vibes, and free solar heat, good luck with that. I don't think the human race is ready for solar cars. So prove me wrong already. Thanks for showing up. This here's Professor U.D. Guru, and I'll see you in the next movie. Bye-bye.